Hi, so I realized at the end of class there's one thing I didn't do that I wanted to, and that was to read you a section from the Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. Um, so I was going to do that really quick. A couple of things. One, there's strong language in this. I don't think that should come as a surprise. So I'm just going to read it as it is. And it actually starts like this with the Galactus quote from Fantastic Four, and then there's a poem. But the part I'm going to start with is the intro to the beginning of the book. So this is how it goes. And remember, this is Junior talking. He's our narrator. And he says, "They say it came first from Africa, carried in the screams of the enslaved, that it was the death bane of the Tanos, uttered just as one world perished and another began, that it was a demon drawn into creation through the nightmare door that cracked open in the Antilles." The Antilles are just those chain of islands in the Caribbean. "Fuku Americanus, or more colloquially, fuku, generally a curse or a doom of some kind, specifically the curse and doom of the New World, also called fuku of the admiral, because the admiral was both its midwife and one of the great European victims. Despite discovering the New World, the admiral died miserable and syphilitic, hearing, decay, divine voices. In Santo Domingo, the land he loved best, what Oscar at the end of the world would call ground zero of the New World, the admiral's very name became synonymous with both kinds of fuku, little and large. To say his name aloud, or even to hear it, is to invite calamity on the heads of you and yours." So the admiral is Christopher Columbus, or Cristobal Colon. And there are lots of examples of like not wanting to actually name somebody, to like actually invoke them. There are various attempts at that, and I guess the one example I think of is with God and Yahweh. They would literally leave out parts of the word, so you weren't physically naming the being. But anyway, no matter what its name or province, it is believed that the arrival of the Europeans on Hispaniola unleashed the fuku on the world, and we've been in shit ever since. Santo Domingo might be Fuku's kilometer zero, its port of entry, but we are all of it, its children, whether we know it or not. But the Fuku ain't just ancient history, a ghost story from the past with no power to scare. In my parents' day, the Fuku was real as shit, something your everyday person could believe in. Everybody knew someone who'd been eaten by a Fuku, just like everybody knew somebody who worked up in the Palacio. It was in the air, you could say, though like almost all important things on the island, not something folks really talked about. Silences. But in those elder days, Fuku had it good. It even had a hype man of sorts, a high priest, you could say. Our then dictator for life, Rafael Leodanas Trujillo Molina. And then there's a footnote. Wrong way. Footnotes usually are used like in research papers, but we see them in Diaz's work and some other literature as well. So I'll read the footnote. 1. For those of you who missed your mandatory 2 seconds of Dominican history, Trujillo, one of the 20th century's most infamous dictators, ruled the Dominican Republic between 1930 and 1961 with an implacable, ruthless brutality. A portly, sadistic, pig-eyed mulatto who bleached his skin, wore platform shoes, and had a fondness for Napoleon-era haberdashery. Trujillo, also known as El Jefe, the failed cattle thief, and fuckface, came to control nearly every aspect of DR's political, cultural, social, and economic life through a potent and familiar mixture of violence, intimidation, massacre, rape, co-optation, and terror. Treated the country like it was a plantation and he was the master. At first glance, he was just your prototypical Latin American caudillo, but his power was terminal in ways that few historians or writers have ever truly captured, or, I would argue, imagined. He was our Sauron, our Auron, our dark side, our once and future dictator, a persona so outlandish, so perverse, so dreadful, that not even a sci-fi writer could have made his ass up. Famous for changing all the names and all of the landmarks in the Dominican Republic, To honor himself, Pico Duarte became Pico Trujillo. Santo Domingo de Guzman, the first and oldest city in the New World, became Ciudad Trujillo. For making ill monopolies out of every slice of the national patrimony, which quickly made him one of the wealthiest men on the planet. For building one of the largest militaries in the hemisphere. Dude had bomber wings, for fuck's sake. For fucking every hot girl in sight, even the wives of his subordinates. Thousands upon thousands upon thousands of women. For insisting on absolute veneration from his pueblo, telling the national slogan was Dios y Trujillo, God in Trujillo, for running the country like it was a Marine boot camp, for stripping friends and allies of their positions and proprieties for no reason at all, and for his almost supernatural abilities. Outstanding accomplishments include the 1937 genocide against the Haitian and Haitian Dominican community, one of the longest, most damaging U.S.-backed dictatorships in the Western Hemisphere, and if we Latin types are skillful at anything, it's tolerating U.S.-backed dictators, so you know this was a hard-earned victory. The Chilenos and Argentinos are still appealing. The creation of the first modern kleptocracy. Kleptocracy is the rule by the people who are least able or least qualified to govern. Trujillo was Mobuto before Mobuto was Mobuto. The systematic bribing of American senators, and last but not least, the forging of the Dominican peoples into a modern state, did what his Marine trainers during the occupation were unable to do. End footnote, back to the story. No one knows whether Trujillo was the curse's servant or its master, its agent or its principal, but it was clear he and it had an understanding that them two was tight. It was believed even in educated circles that anyone who plotted against Trujillo would incur a fuku most powerful, down to the 7th generation and beyond. If you even thought a bad thing about Trujillo, fwa, a hurricane would sweep your family out to sea. Fwa, a boulder would fall out of the sky and squash you. Fwa, the shrimp you ate today was the cramp that killed you tomorrow. Which explains why everyone who tried to assassinate him always got done. Why those dudes who finally did buck him down and all died so horrifically. And what about fucking Kennedy? He was the one who green-lighted the assassination of Trujillo in 1961, who ordered the CIA to deliver arms to the island. Bad move, Cap'n. For what Kennedy's intelligence experts failed to tell him was that every single Dominican, from the richest Jabao and Mao to the poorest Guy and El Boy, from the oldest Anciano San Macarizno to the littlest Carajito in San Francisco, knew that whoever killed Trujillo, their family would suffer a fuku so dreadful it would make the one that attached itself to the admiral Jahota in comparison. You want a final conclusive answer to the Warren Commission's question, who killed JFK? Let me, your humble watcher, reveal once and for all the God's honest truth. It wasn't the mob, or LBJ, or the ghost of Marilyn fucking Monroe. It wasn't aliens, or the KGB, or a lone gunman. It wasn't the Hunt brothers of Texas, or Lee Harvey, or the Trilateral Commission. It was Trujillo. It was the fuku. Where in Canazo do you think the so-called curse of the Kennedy comes from? Footnote again, number 2. Here's one for you conspiracy-minded fools. On the night that John Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessente and her sister Lauren went down in the Piper Saratoga, John's father's favorite domestic, Provincia Paredes Dominicana, was in Martha's Vineyard cooking up for John his favorite dish, chicharrón de pollo. But fuku always eats first and always eats alone. How about Vietnam? Why do you think... Oh, sorry, there's the end of the footnote. How about Vietnam? Why do you think the greatest power in the world lost its first war to a third world country like Vietnam? I mean, Negro, please. It might interest you that just as the U.S. was ramping up its involvement in Vietnam, LBJ launched an illegal invasion of the Dominican Republic, April 28, 1965. Santo Domingo was Iraq before Iraq was Iraq. A smashing military success for the U.S., and many of the same units and intelligence teams that took part in the democratization of Santo Domingo were immediately shipped off to Saigon. What do you think these sailors, technicians, and spooks carried with them in their rucks, in their suitcases, in their shirt pockets, on the hair inside their nostrils, caked up in the round their shoes? Just a little gift from my people to America, a small repayment for an unjust war. That's right, folks, fuku. Which is why it's important to remember fuku doesn't always strike like lightning. Sometimes it works patiently, drowning a nigger by degrees, like with the admiral or the U.S. in patties outside of Saigon. Sometimes it's slow and sometimes it's fast. It's doomish in that way and makes it harder to put a finger on, to brace yourself against. But be assured, like Darkseid's Omega effect, like Morgoth's Bane, footnote number 3, I am the Elder King, Melkor, first and mightiest of all valor, who was before the world and made it. The shadow of my world lies upon Arda, and all that is in it bends slowly and surely to my will. But upon all whom you love, my thought shall weigh as a cloud of doom, and it shall bring them down into darkness and despair. Wherever they go, evil shall arise. Whenever they speak, their words shall bring ill counsel. Whatsoever they do shall turn against them. They shall die without hope, cursing both life and death. End footnote. No matter how many turns and digressions this shit might take, it always, and I mean always, gets its man. Whether I believe in what many have described as a great American doom is not really the point. You live as long as I did in the heart of Fuku country, you hear these kinds of tales all the time. Everybody in Santo Domingo has a Fuku story knocking around in their family. I have a 12-daughter uncle in the Caballo who believed that he had been cursed by an old lover never to have male children, Fuku. I have a tia who believed she had been denied happiness because she laughed at a rival's funeral, Fuku. My paternal abuelo believes that the diaspora was Trujillo's payback to the pueblo that betrayed him, Fuku. It's perfectly fine if you don't believe in these quote-unquote superstitions. In fact, it's better than fine. It's perfect, because no matter what you believe, Fuku believes in you. A couple weeks ago, while I was finishing this book, I posted the thread Fuku on the DRI forum, just out of curiosity. These days I'm nerdy like that. The talkback blew the fuck up. You should see how many responses I've gotten. They just keep coming in, and not just from the domos. The Puerto Rocks want to talk about fufus, and the Haitians have some shit just like it. There are zillions of these fuku stories. Even my mother, who almost never talks about Santo Domingo, has started sharing hers with me. As I'm sure you've guessed by now, I have a fuku story too. I wish I could say it was the best of the lot, fuku number 1, but I can't. Mine ain't the scariest, the clearest, the most painful, or the most beautiful. It just happens to be the one that it's got its fingers around my throat. I'm not entirely sure Oscar would have liked this designation, fuku story. He was a hardcore sci-fi and fantasy man, believed that that was the kind of story we were all living in. He'd asked, what's more sci-fi than Santo Domingo? What's more fantasy than the Antilles? But now that I know how it all turns out, I have to ask in turn, what more fuku? One final note, Toto, before Kansas goes bye-bye. Traditionally in Santo Domingo, anytime you mention or overheard the admiral's name, or anytime a fuku reared its many heads, there was only one way to prevent disaster from coiling around you. Only one surefire counterspell that would keep you and your family safe. Not surprisingly, it was a word, a simple word, followed usually by a vigorous crossing of fingers, Zafa. It used to be more popular in the old days, bigger, so to speak, in Macondo than in Macondo. There are people, though, like my Tio Miguel in the Bronx, who still Zafa everything. He's old school like that. If the Yanks commit an error in the late innings, it's Zafa. If somebody brings shells in from the beach, it's Zafa. If you serve a man parka, it's a Zafa. 24-hour Zafa and the hope that the bad luck will not have time to cohere. Even now as I write these words, I wonder if this book ain't a Zafa of sorts, my very own counterspell. Anyway, enjoy.